The round, luminous moon bathed the city in a silvery glow, casting shadows in the narrow, silent alleyways. At midnight, a black cat with silky fur stretched gently on its master's windowsill before gracefully leaping into the street. The night was its kingdom, a world where it could slip unseen like a ghost in the darkness. That night, like so many others, Midnight set out in search of new stories. Every night it roamed the city streets. It knew every nook and cranny, every smell and every sound of the night. But that night, something special drew it to a house on the corner of the main street. Through the living room window, Midnight glimpsed a touching scene. A father, exhausted from a long day at work, sat on the sofa, a tired but sincere smile on his lips. His little girl, with blonde curls and sparkling eyes, laughed joyfully, showing him a drawing she had made that day. The father tenderly embraced his daughter, finding in these moments of tenderness and complicity the strength to carry on. Midnight observed the scene. He felt the paternal love permeating the air, a soothing warmth that contrasted with the night's chill. Despite his drawn features, the father seemed reborn in his daughter's presence. His hands, usually rough and calloused, were now soft and protective. He listened attentively to every word his daughter uttered, every laugh she let out. The little girl, for her part, was a whirlwind of joy and energy. She bounced on the sofa, recounting her day with overflowing enthusiasm. Her father watched her with eyes full of love and pride, savoring every moment spent with her. For him, these moments were priceless treasures, instants of pure happiness that illuminated his often monotonous and difficult days. Midnight continued to observe, fascinated by this relationship, so sweet and so powerful at the same time. He saw the father telling his daughter a story, his low, reassuring voice filling the room with an atmosphere of security and comfort. The little girl, nestled against him, listened, her eyelids slowly closing under the influence of the sound. Finally, exhausted, the father gently carried her to her bed, approaching her carefully before placing a kiss on her forehead. The house regained its calm. Only the dim light of the living room continued to shine faintly. Midnight lingered for a while longer, savoring this newfound serenity. He knew that tomorrow and the days to come, this house would continue to shelter this paternal love, so strong, so pure. The black cat, satisfied with his discovery, gently set off again for new nocturnal adventures. He loved his walks, where each lit window revealed a new facet of human love. For him, the night was much more than a simple absence of light. It was a theater where the dramas and comedies of life were played out, a world where love unveiled itself in all its forms. The moon shone high in the sky, and midnight struck. The black cat continued his nocturnal stroll. He had left the house of the father and his daughter with a sweet feeling of serenity, but the night was still young, and his wanderings were only just beginning. He crossed silently several streets, his paws barely touching the cobblestones, until he was drawn to a small house at the end of a quiet alley. Through the window, Midnight glimpsed a soft, warm light. Curious, he approached and saw an old woman sitting in an armchair, a photo album open on her lap. Her white hair was neatly combed, and her eyes, though tired, shone with infinite tenderness as she looked at the photos. The old woman slowly turned the pages of the album, caressing each photo with a delicate touch tinged with nostalgia. The images, yellowed by time, told the story of a past love, a love that had marked her life. Midnight could feel the melancholy in the air, a gentle sadness that accompanied the memories of a bygone era.
Every evening, the old woman repeated this ritual, immersing herself in the memories of her deceased husband. She reread their letters of love, carefully preserved in a wooden box, and smiled, remembering the happy moments they had shared.
Midnight could almost hear bursts of laughter and loving whispers resonated in the room, echoes of a distant but never forgotten past. One day, while strolling in the nearby park, the old lady encountered a stray dog. It was a small dog, with a mythical air, but its sad, pleading eyes immediately touched her heart. She decided to take it home, thus offering the animal a new chance and finding in it a new source of comfort. Midnight observed this new dynamic with interest. The dog, though initially wary and fearful, quickly became attached to the old lady. He followed her everywhere, his brown eyes filled with gratitude and affection. Their relationship evolved rapidly, each day bringing its share of small joys and new shared rituals. The evenings, once marked by solitude, were now filled with the dog's faithful company. The old lady gradually regained her smile, her eyes lighting up again with that spark of life she had lost. From her privileged vantage point, Midnight could see how this love, rediscovered in a new form, brought a new energy and a new peace for the old woman. She continued to cherish the memories of her husband, but she had also found a new source of affection and happiness. Returning home, the old woman settled into her usual armchair, the dog curled up at her feet. She took a recent photo of the two of them and slipped it into the album next to the photos of her husband. For her, it was a symbol of acceptance and the continuation of life. Love had many forms, and each form deserved to be cherished and celebrated. Midnight watched for another moment, relishing this new facet of love he had discovered that night. Satisfied with his discovery, he finally turned away from the window and silently walked off, ready to continue his nocturnal explorations. The night was an endless stage, and Midnight knew there were still many stories to discover. Stories of love in all its forms. Midnight, the black cat, continued his nocturnal wanderings under the soft glow of the moon. His silent steps led him this time to a busier neighborhood, where the houses were newer and the gardens carefully tended. Dim light caught his attention, emanating from a partially open window. Midnight gracefully jumped onto the windowsill and peered inside. A young couple was busy at work. They seemed to have recently moved in, the boxes still scattered throughout the apartment. The young man, with tousled hair and a mischievous smile, was attempting to assemble a piece of flat-pack furniture, while the young woman, Emma, her long brown hair tied back in a ponytail, read the instructions with intense concentration. Midnight could sense the excitement and apprehension in the air, a mixture of anticipation and discovery. The young man, let's call him Lucas, was struggling to get a stubborn shelf to stand upright. He grimaced as he tried to align the pieces, while the young woman, Emma, tried to help him by giving him directions. Despite their efforts, the shelf stubbornly refused to stand straight. Lucas collapsed to the floor, a disarming smile on his lips. "I think we might have missed something," he said, laughing. Emma couldn't help but laugh too. She put down the manual and sat down next to him, their shoulders lightly touching. "Maybe we should try again tomorrow," she suggested, resting her head on his shoulder. Lucas put an arm around her shoulders, gently pulling her close. They stayed like that for a few moments, savoring the closeness and warmth of each other. Midnight watched this scene of tenderness and complicity, fascinated by the sweetness and shyness of their budding love. He saw them get up and head towards the kitchen, where they began to prepare a meal together. Emma chopped the vegetables while Lucas took care of the cooking. Their movements were sometimes clumsy, bumping into each other or crossing paths unexpectedly. But each time they exchanged smiles and bursts of laughter.
transforming these moments of awkwardness into precious memories. After dinner, they settled on the sofa, a soft blanket on their laps. They watched a film, but their thoughts seemed to be elsewhere. Midnight saw them exchanging furtive glances.
Their hands tentatively sought each other under the covers. Finally, Lucas took Emma's hand in his, their fingers gently intertwined. They drew closer, their heads almost touching, and a comfortable silence settled between them. The evening wore on, and Midnight continued to observe, capturing every moment of this mutual discovery. He saw Lucas place a light kiss on Emma's forehead, and she responded with a serene smile, closing her eyes and savoring the moment. Their love, though young and tentative, was full of promise and potential. They were learning to know each other, to understand the subtleties of their gestures and words, to build together a home based on respect and tenderness.
Their hands tentatively sought each other under the covers. Finally, Lucas took Emma's hand in his, their fingers gently intertwined. They drew closer, their heads almost touching, and a comfortable silence settled between them. The evening wore on, and Midnight continued to observe, capturing every moment of this mutual discovery. He saw Lucas place a light kiss on Emma's forehead, and she responded with a serene smile, closing her eyes and savoring the moment. Their love, though young and tentative, was full of promise and potential. They were learning to know each other, to understand the subtleties of their gestures and words, to build together a home based on respect and tenderness. Midnight, satisfied with what he had seen, discreetly left the windowsill as he melted back into the shadows of the night. He thought of the beauty of love in its early stages, of that fragile and wonderful phase where every moment is a discovery and every gesture a silent declaration of affection. For him, this night had been another lesson in the many facets of love. Human, and he knew that other adventures still awaited him in the houses of the sleeping city. Midnight resumed his nocturnal exploration with feline grace, making a few detours to play with a fluttering leaf or to intimidate a dog through a gate. Ah, dogs, always noisy and excited over nothing. Midnight knew how to savor the night with elegance and discretion, as only a cat could. And of course, he couldn't resist the urge to stop under a lamppost to lick his paw and smooth his whiskers. After all, a cat must always remain impeccable, even while deep in observation. As he continued his stroll, a new scent caught his attention. A slightly more isolated house seemed to hide many mysteries. Midnight curiously made his way toward this new target, his paws barely touching the cobblestones. Through the half-draped curtains, he glimpsed a soft, flickering light. Inside, a man sat at his desk, a quill in his hand, engrossed in writing a letter. The room was dimly lit by a desk lamp, creating a warm and intimate atmosphere. Intrigued, Midnight jumped onto the windowsill and settled comfortably to observe the man we'll call Antoine. He seemed focused on his task. Each word he wrote was carefully chosen, and his face reflected deep emotion. Midnight noticed a stack of already written letters beside him, ready to be sent. Antoine was writing to his wife, Sophie, who worked abroad. Their relationship was kept alive by constant effort and sincere communication, despite the distance between them. Midnight watched as he finished his letter with a tender smile. He reread it one last time before carefully folding it and slipping it into an envelope. Then Antoine turned on his laptop and prepared for a video conference. A few moments later, Sophie's face appeared on the screen, radiant with happiness at the sight of her husband. Their exchanges were filled with love and complicity. They talked about their day, sharing anecdotes and laughter. Despite the physical separation, Midnight could feel the strength of their bond, a connection that transcended the miles. Every word, every smile, it was a promise of loyalty and devotion.
Antoine showed Sophie the letter he had just written, and she smiled back, touched by this gesture. They discussed their future plans, their shared dream, and how they overcame the challenges of distance. For them, each conversation was a breath of fresh air, a way to grow closer despite the thousands of kilometers that separated them. Midnight watched this scene with silent fascination. He now understood that love could thrive even in the most difficult conditions, thanks to the will and commitment of both partners. Antoine and Sophie demonstrated that distance was not an insurmountable obstacle, but rather a challenge to be met together. When the video conference ended, Antoine remained seated in front of the screen, a melancholic smile on his lips. He gently closed the computer and got up to pack his things. Midnight watched him, admiring the resilience and strength of this long-distance love.
Sophie being apart every day was a trial, but also proof of their devotion to each other. Antoine went to the window to open it and let in some fresh air. That's when he noticed Midnight comfortably settled on the sill. "Well, look who's here," he said with a smile. "You seem to like this house too." Antoine reached out and gently stroked Midnight, who closed her eyes and purred with pleasure. "You know, my little cat, love can be really difficult sometimes," Antoine murmured, as if speaking to an old friend. "Sophie and I do our best to stay close despite the distance. Letters and calls are all we have for the moment, but it's enough because we truly love each other." Sensing the sincerity in Antoine's words, Midnight looked up at him, her amber eyes shining in the soft lamplight. Antoine continued to stroke the cat, finding some comfort in her silent presence. "You see, even when she's far away, I feel her presence. And every letter, every call reminds me why I wait so eagerly. His return, love. That's it, I suppose, being patient and having faith." After a few moments of shared silence, Antoine sat up and smiled. "Midnight, thank you for the company, little cat. You're always welcome here." Midnight gracefully jumped from the windowsill, ready to continue his nocturnal explorations. Satisfied with his discovery, Midnight discreetly left the windowsill as he melted back into the shadows of the night. He thought about the beauty and complexity of human love. Tonight he had learned that love could thrive even in absence, thanks to the sincerity and constant effort of devoted hearts. Midnight continued his nocturnal exploration, his black fur blending into the shadows of the alleyways. After satisfying his hunger on the balcony of the kind woman who always left him food, he felt ready for new adventures. His stomach full and his mind alert, he nimbly climbed the city walls until he reached the top of a building from where he could observe the scenes of life in the lit windows opposite. He loved that aspect of the night, when the city quieted and each window became a scene in an intimate theater. The animated figures behind the curtains awakened his curiosity. He saw couples chatting softly, solitary individuals engrossed in reading or work, and sometimes families gathered around a table. Each of these scenes told a story, and Midnight loved to guess the tales unfolding behind the lighted panes. Suddenly, a particular scene caught his attention. An elderly woman with silver hair and a face etched by time sat in a large, warmly lit room. She seemed alone, but her animated and expressive gestures captivated the attention of someone out of sight. Midnight narrowed his eyes, intrigued. Why was this woman moving with such vigor and passion? Was she talking to someone, or was she lost in a solitary reverie? Midnight felt a slight unease rising within him. Stories of haunted houses and lonely old women tormented by spirits were not rare in human accounts, and if something sinister were happening in this house, the possibility that this woman might be in danger or under the influence of a supernatural force crossed the cat's mind. His whiskers quivered with excitement mixed with apprehension. He had to get to the bottom of it. With the caution of a detective and the insatiable curiosity of a cat, Midnight silently descended from his perch and crept into the house. He slipped through a half-open window, his paws barely touching the floor. Inside, he hid in a dark corner, his eyes shining in the gloom, observing the scene intently. As he drew closer, the situation became clearer. The woman was not alone. A small boy, probably her grandson, was sitting cross-legged on a rug, his eyes wide and a smile on his lips. The grandmother was telling a story. But it wasn't just a reading. She acted out the scenes with energy and passion. Surprisingly, Midnight relaxed, realizing her fears were unfounded. The old lady was neither haunted nor tormented. She was simply in. While telling fantastical stories to her grandson, her expressive gestures, which he had interpreted as potentially unsettling, were in fact dramatic illustrations of a dragon, a count, and a princess. She roared like a dragon, imitated the gallop of horses, and transformed into a brave princess. The little boy laughed and clapped, completely absorbed by the adventures his grandmother was creating. The black cat lingered for a moment, observing this touching scene, admiring the complicity and love between the grandmother and her grandson. He reflected that intergenerational love had something particularly magical about it, a connection that transcends time and age. Satisfied with his discovery, Midnight discreetly left the house, leaving the grandmother and the little boy to their nocturnal fairy tale. He slipped back into the shadows of the night, his heart filled with a new lesson about the many facets of human love. Suddenly, something unexpected caught his attention. Passing by a building, he glimpsed a small figure approaching the edge of a balcony dangerously, a child seemingly fascinated by something. Outside, leaning further and further forward, Midnight immediately sensed the danger. The child was in danger of falling, and his mother, busy inside, didn't seem to have noticed the situation. Midnight approached cautiously, ceasing to be on high alert. He knew he had to act quickly to avoid a tragedy. Spotting a rather heavy flower pot on a shelf, he darted forward with the determination of a feline on a mission. With a precise movement, he knocked the flower pot to the ground, producing a dull, resounding thud. The mother, alarmed by the noise, immediately ran onto the balcony. She cried out when she saw her child precariously balanced and immediately brought him safely back into her arms. Midnight, observing the scene from a corner, felt relieved. He had managed to attract the mother's attention in time.
The woman, grateful but still in shock, saw the black cat sitting nearby. She quickly understood that it was he who had accidentally knocked over the pot. "Oh, thank you, little cat," she murmured. "You saved my son." She gently approached Midnight and stroked him. With gratitude to thank him, she gave him a treat she had in the kitchen. Then, seeing that her son was still agitated and frightened, she had an idea. She gently picked up Midnight and carried him to the child's room. "Perhaps you could help soothe my little boy," she said, gently placing Midnight on the bed. The cat, a little hesitant at the idea of being used as a doll, watched the little boy curiously. The child, reassured by the cat's presence, snuggled against him. Midnight, feeling the child's warmth and softness, finally relaxed and began to purr softly. The mother sat beside the bed, whispering words of love to her son. "You are safe now, my treasure. This little cat will watch over you." Lulled by the soothing sound of the sea and the little boy's touch, Midnight completely relaxed. He closed his eyes and took a well-deserved nap, enveloped by the warmth and tenderness of their home. After a while, Midnight woke up gently. The little boy was sleeping soundly, a peaceful smile on his face. Seeing that the cat had done its job, the mother thanked him once more. "Thank you, little hero," she whispered, gently stroking his head. Midnight slowly got up, stretched, and left the bed. He knew it was time for him to continue his nocturnal journey. He crept quietly out of the room, casting one last look at the sleeping child and his grateful mother as he returned to the quiet streets. Midnight felt proud of his night. He had saved a life and brought comfort to a family. The moon was beginning to set on the horizon, signaling the end of the night. After a night full of adventure and discovery, Midnight felt it was time to go home. His nocturnal wanderings had taken him through the city, where he had witnessed many forms of love. With every window observed and every house visited, he had learned something new about the mysteries of the human heart. Tired but content, Midnight walked through the quiet, familiar streets until he reached a small, secluded house. This house was his home, and his master was waiting for him there.
Midnight began to purr louder, as if to remind him that love takes many forms. The bond they shared, though different from the romances Pierre wrote, was a form of love just as real and precious. "You're right, Midnight," murmured Pierre. "Smiling, you bring me so much comfort and joy. Perhaps what I'm looking for is already here in our friendship." Midnight stood up against Pierre, happy to be able to bring a little comfort to his master. He knew that their shared moments were precious, and that even without grand declarations or romantic gestures, love was present in every caress, every glance. The writer took a deep breath and resumed writing, inspired by Midnight's soothing presence. The love stories he created were imbued with the understanding and compassion he shared with his cat. And so the night drew to a close. Midnight snuggled against Pierre, closing his eyes with contentment. He knew that his nocturnal adventures had a purpose, to show his master that love is everywhere, even in the simplest and most discreet bonds. As dawn broke, Pierre put down his pen and turned to Midnight. "Thank you, my friend," he murmured. "Thanks to you, I've learned that love exists in so many forms, and that the most important thing is to recognize and appreciate it." Midnight purred in response, feeling the warmth of Pierre's affection. They fell asleep together, their hearts filled with gratitude and peace. For Midnight, each night was a new adventure, a new lesson about human love. And for Pierre, each day was a new chance to discover the love that already surrounded him. Thus, men would continue his nocturnal explorations, continuing to discover and share the many facets of love, knowing that he had already found a precious form of affection in his own home.